you in with the promise of Jordan Peterson. But for the first little while, we're going to be talking about logic. So Ben wrote an article last week, which we didn't cover because he was out and about, on the liar paradox. Do you want to give a 10-second gloss, 30-second gloss on the liar paradox, Ben?
Sure. I should say, for anybody who's unfamiliar, all of these articles are the Philosophy for the People Substack. So that's benburgis.substack.com, and that link is down there below the box where we're talking right now. But yeah, so the liar paradox is the paradox about sentences like the following one. What I'm saying right now is not true. And there is this one way of thinking about that problem is that there are two really basic logical principles that seem to come into conflict if you think about how that sentence works. One of them is that every statement is either true or not true. That's called the fancy name for that is the law of the excluded middle. And the other one is that no statement is both true and untrue. That's the law of non-contradiction. And the problem is, in this case, if that statement is true, it's not true, so it's both. If it's false, it's not true, so it's both. If it's if it's some mysterious third thing that's not true and not false, then it's not true, and so it is true, so it's both. That's the problem.
And what kind of shocked me about the article, which people can go read, and we aren't going to spend that much time on it. I guess, I don't know, I should be shocked because I know about this kind of debate, but it was kind of surprising to think about that people would be willing to abandon those two incredibly important principles for just everyday reasoning and making sense of anything for the sake of these few useless sentences.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, so there are positions. I mean, in some ways it's the Cicero thing, right? He says somewhere that there's no position that's so ridiculous it isn't advocated by some philosopher. But I think to give it to so like there's like nothing that's too extreme that like somebody out there hasn't advocated it, but it's also, I mean, I guess to give the position its due, you think like, okay, well, if we're really trying to understand what's going on here, then there are all these ways, then like, sure, it might seem kind of unimportant, but also like, seriously, what is going on with those sentences is that, I mean, you could just decide to not think about it or whatever, but I mean, if you are interested in thinking about it, then you try to get to the bottom of it, then it's in a way it is a natural thought that you'll have at some point. It's like, well, maybe these incredibly important bedrock principles, maybe these aren't universal generalizations, maybe there are real exceptions to these things. And people who say stuff like that typically end up saying, well, dialetheism is the fancy name for the giving up on non-contradiction position.
Which sounds like some weird variant of atheism or theism or something.
Yeah. Dialetheist, maybe. If you want to know about religion, dialetheist. That's So that's so most famously advocated by this guy Graham Priest. So the dumb joke that I reproduced in the essay to helps you remember.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Hello, Graham.
He's still. Yeah, he wrote a new book in like 2021. So I don't, and I'm pretty sure I would have heard about it if he died. But yeah, he. I went to a conference in Glasgow like 10 years ago that was about his book, and I remember somebody there making this dumb joke they're reproducing the essay, which is to help you remember who this guy is and what his position is, which is that an Irish priest, a Scottish priest, and Graham Priest walk into a bar. The Irish priest says, "I'll have a whiskey." The Scottish priest says, "I won't." Graham Priest says, "I'll have what they're having." So is accepted the possibility of true contradictions, what dialetheism means, like aletheia is like true. So it's like two truths. Or the opposite, and so Priest will say you can have, okay, so maybe we should be rejecting classical logic in favor of paraconsistent logic, which is a fancy way of saying like inconsistency tolerance, that some contradictions can be true without everything being true, like there are in classical logic. Hartree-Field has the equal and opposite position. He says, okay, well, that would be ridiculous, but maybe we could say there are exceptions to the law of the excluded middle. So he has his like parallel position is called paracompleteness, that, you know, we abandoned this requirement of completeness that every single statement is either true or not true. And people who say stuff like this will typically say, okay, obviously these principles do play a certain role in our ordinary reasoning, and so if you just said, well, they're just wrong, so any logical rules that are like based on them are just, despite all appearances, just not right, which is like that would be kind of crazy, right? Like they, you know, I mean, if I say, you know, if I haven't been in Mexico for long enough to be sure what these coins are, but they have a, you know, if there's like a, you know, here's a coin, put in my hands, it's in one of my hands, it's not in this one, right? So it must be in this one. That's disjunctive syllogism, right? Either A or B, not A, therefore B, which only works if the law of non-contradiction is right, because...
Right, and by the fact that children believe that sort of thing, it's very easy to do magic.
Yeah, there
and the fact that, you know, even animals, you can trick them in the same way, right?
Yeah, there you go. But so people basically, you know, like people, I won't go through it all here. People can read the essay if they're interested, but people who say stuff like this will have strategies for trying to minimize the damage. They'll say like, okay, even though these you know, which I
don't think is like really like, if you're going to believe contradictions are true, just go fucking wild with it, mate.
Yeah, what is this half-assed? Yeah. Yeah. Well, they don't want to, you know, like that little bit of reason about the coin, you know, they don't want to be completely crazy people and say that that's not legitimate in some way. So they have to have some kind of explanation of like, okay, maybe there's certain spheres where classical logic still works or something like that. And so in the essay, which is also based on, I mean, I wrote a book about this that finally came out last year, Logic Without Gaps or Gluts. So you can read the essay to get like a little bit of this. You can read the book if you like really want a lot of it. But like I spent a lot of that sort of arguing that these strategies to minimize the damage don't really work, right? That if you say like it doesn't really make sense on closer investigation to say, okay, here are the spheres in which this works and here are the ones that doesn't, you know, like there's actually on once you once you open Pandora's box, right, there's really no good way to contain it like that. And so if you think that if you think that that like it would be crazy to say that the coin argument isn't a valid argument, then you need to go looking for somewhere else to explain what's going on with those sentences. You need an alternate theory, and I give one of them in the essay in the book.
I mean, do you want to spoil the ending? Because I went into the essay with an idea, and we basically agreed in the end.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, so the key move is about propositions. So, because obviously, if I say like the sentence I'm saying right now is not true, like that sentence exists, right? I mean that like that combination of sounds, that grammatical object, whatever, right? That thing exists, but I think what we're really concerned with, we're thinking about logic, is sentences exactly. It's the propositions that are expressed by sentences. So proposition is like if you say I don't know, Stefan is not here, and then you say like a Spanish sentence, Stefan no está aquí, I guess, if that's wrong. I'm working on 42 days of Duolingo. I'll get it right eventually. But assuming that I got it right, those those two sentences are different sentences, right? They're different combinations of words, but they mean the same thing, or the fancy way of saying that is they express the same proposition, that the same property is being attributed to the same object in both sentences. And so basically, I don't think, it's like, okay, they're clearly liar sentences, but I don't really think there's a liar proposition. I don't think that,
Right, like what the fuck does that sentence mean? What does it refer to? What does it know? Like it's just fucking, it's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, so like an analogy, it's a very rough analogy, but I think I use it in the essay, is like if I say, this is that, right? Like that's, everybody knows in a sense what that sentence means. They understand all those words. They know how the rules of grammar, string those meanings together, right? But what proposition am I expressing when I say this is that? I mean, look, I could be expressing a number of different propositions, but if I'm just, since in this case, I just made it up as an example and I don't have one in mind, right? Then I'm not, right? It's a grammatically well-formed sentence, but it doesn't mean anything in the sense of expressing.
I mean, this is obviously like a controversial example, but what immediately came to my mind was when people talk about God's omnipotence.
Yeah.
And one suggestion for why things like, can God make a rock which is too heavy for him to lift is not a problem, is that these sentences just don't make sense. Like it's like asking, can like God flank do, like it's just the so for me, like getting into it, these sentences, the possibility that there can be a sentence which seems like it refers to something, but in reality it just doesn't make any sense, was very familiar to me, basically.
Yeah. I think my take on that one might just be no.
Can God make a rock? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of more standard answer, that God just can't do the logically impossible. But there's also a suggestion that maybe these sort of sentences just, they seem like they refer to something, but they don't.
Yeah,
What's interesting? Sorry, go on. No,
well,
I was going to move on to Jordan Peterson, because
let's do Jordan
what's
Peterson.
interesting is
we can do heavy rocks another week.
We I think we might be too aligned on at least some matters, because I went into the logic essay with an idea of kind of the answer, and I went to the Jordan Peterson essay with also an idea of what the answer would be, and it was also your answer, which is that Jordan Peterson is a fucking atheist.
Yeah, I think he's an atheist. So I should say, so the setup for this, like I was originally going to write about, Sam Harris this week. So in a sense, it's not that far off, because the original plan was I was going to write about Sam Harris's book about free will. But
all right, that'll be fun, because I've answered so many fucking questions on Reddit about it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, let's do it next week. So that was the original plan, but I ended up getting sidetracked for that plan because on Monday, I was sitting on a plane. So we'd done the live show in New York on Sunday, and so on Monday, Jason Miles, Jordan Dubin, and I were getting ready to fly back to the West Coast, and I was sitting on the plane, kind of absentmindedly going through my Twitter feed on my phone, in that mindless, addicted way that you do. And I saw Jordan Peterson tweeting, "Atheists unconsciously worship Pan." I was like, well, that's fun, right? Like, what is Jordan thinking right now, right? Like this is I kind of admit in the essay, it's like part of the reason I've written so much about him. I mean, some of it, in political context at least, is because, he's immensely depressingly influential, but like, there's also part of it that's just the guy is just fascinatingly strange, right? And so even having spent way too much attention, time paying attention to him over the years, he'll still say things that like, wait, what? Right? And this is one of those, right? Atheists unconsciously worship Pan. It's like, wait, really? What is he saying right now? And
I mean, it's kind of like a post by that. Do you know that guy on Twitter who he posts similar things, like kind of he's like a postmodern neo-Marxist kind of person who posts like, all leftists or Heideggerians or whatever. And he clearly has no idea what he's talking about, but he just says these words over and over again. He's really big too. I'm not sure. I can't remember his name, but whatever.
But
But
yeah,
yeah,
like so in this, I was thinking about this, like this weird, this weird Twitter thread that Jordan Peterson had about how atheists worship Pan, and it actually it was interesting to me because I have spent way too much time tracking his weird pronouncements since like 2018 or maybe even 2017. When he kind of first came on my radar, and it really hit me. I mean, this is not a totally this is not original. Like there are other people who said things like this about him, but I mean, like it really hit me when I was sort of going through a lot of the previous bizarre statements he's made about religion and other subjects. That it's like, there is something really funny about this because he likes to score culture war points by bashing atheists, but that raises an obvious question. Well, what does Jordan Peterson believe? Does he believe in God? Right? And if you start like really paying close attention to the things he said about this, I think no. I think he really wants to, right? But I think in a weird way, like there's a lot of like he famously spouts a lot of gibberish when this question comes open, right? Like, so a famous example from late last year, I think from his trip to Israel, he's talking to Mohammed Hijab, was said, do you believe in God? Well, there are several mysteries in that question. What do you mean by do? What do you mean by you? What do you mean by believe? And it's like, oh, that's a weird thing to say. Why is he saying that? Like, like he says a lot of different kinds of weird things when the subject comes up. And I have to say, I mean, to give him, I guess, one sort of credit where credit is due, I think he's like a little bit too honest to just.
no, I mean it's incredible that he's never just lied about it and just said, "Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe in God." Like I would do that by accident at some point.
yeah, he never just says, "Yep, totally. Next question." Right? Like, yeah,
Like,
like there's always some weird song and dance
like
about it.
it's not just that Peterson kind of hedges and is vague, but that he's an absolute kind of. There's no one in the world that's good at him as him, and he just does it. Like for him, it's natural as breathing, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Like he just the.
I mean, it's probably from being like the token conservative in like a liberal arts department for all his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess psychiatry, but yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I wonder, right? Like, because you're right, he does do this thing that's like, you watch enough of it, you get kind of inured to it, but then like you do something like transcribe some of it to quote it in an essay, and it just hits you afresh. That it's like, wait, what? Right? Because like the things like, toward the end of the essay, I talk about this video from when Peterson and his now employer Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire appeared together on Dave Rubin's show a few years ago, and Rubin asked the God question, and like Ben Shapiro gives a very boring answer when it's finally his turn. Like he's like, it's like a sort of very straightforward, like, okay, I kind of vaguely remember what Thomas Aquinas said. I'll sort of do my best to repeat that kind of answer.
Right, like good high school essay.
Yeah, yeah. And exactly. But like the stuff that Peterson says is like, did he, like, it sounds like he's like maybe just coming down from some amazing ketamine experience, and he's like not quite down yet, and he's trying to communicate what he's experienced over the course of the last several hours, and it's like all it's very emotionally intense. He's talking about Jesus at the beginning. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to do a Jordan Peterson accent, but so says like the Jesus says in the New Testament's no way to the Father through him, and that's a hell of a thing to say, and he was like really worked up about it, but then he kind of loses his train of thought, and he and he never really finishes the thought, and he pivots to this stuff about evolutionary biology and psychology and how, you know, we have more female ancestors than male ones because everybody desired the high status males, and then like it's sort of like he sort of works his way up to this thing about how like this like weird kind of Jungian but also evolutionary kind of view about how you know this like spirit of masculinity is embedded in our, you know, DNA or whatever, you know, because of this evolutionary history. And it's like, okay, this is all kind of nonsense, but it also sounds like a naturalistic explanation for why people believe in God, right? That's it doesn't sound like this sounds like the opposite, right, of you endorsing religious belief. And then he sort of tacks on, and I think he realizes at a certain point in his answer, hold on, right? I'm kind of coming down on the wrong side of this question now. Like I want to be on team religion. And so he says the stuff at the end about, no, but I also think there's this metaphysical layer underneath that. But then like what he says about the metaphysical layer is just so hopelessly vague that it just doesn't mean anything really. It's like
yeah, it's not even like a kind of a modified Catholic answer, because for kind of, I mean, like the Catholic Church thinks, you know, as in the Catholic Catechism, that it's obvious that God exists from just looking at the natural world, right?
yeah.
And you could very easily go with that tact, but you know, he's
No,
an
he
atheist.
could have, but this is the thing. I think if Jordan Peterson believed in God, then he could say that. But like he's in this weird position where he doesn't. I mean, he wants to, but he doesn't. And he's you know, but he's like just too honest to like straightforward, like he's willing to fudge it, right? But he's not willing to just like outright misrepresent his beliefs. Which, you know, one of the things I say in the essay is I find this fascinating too, because given his stated views about truth, I think that it's like he would actually be sort of, there's a way that consistently with what he thinks the truth is, he could say, yeah, that's true, God exists, and leave it at that, right? But like I think maybe he doesn't, like in some weird way, he doesn't completely buy his own stated view on truth, right? So his stated view is like, well, if some, you know, beliefs are true, if they're good for the survival and flourishing of the human race, and he clearly thinks that religion is good, you know, religious belief, Christian belief, you know, is good for the survival and flourishing of the human race. I mean, something you pointed out to me, I don't know, several months back, right? We did a stream on sublation like in 2022 sometime. So I think you were the one who first pointed this out to me, and when you said it, it was like, oh yeah, right, that's obviously correct. And I ended up putting in this essay, is like when Peterson talks about Nietzsche, he does it in this weird way that's like he sort of, it's like as if he thinks that Nietzsche is a Christian, right? That like the death of God is this like dire warning about this horrible thing that's happening to Western civilization.
Or Nietzsche isn't a Christian, but he should be a guy like Peterson who pretends, because otherwise he is lost. And I think that's kind of the most fascinating thing about Peterson, that he's very forthright about being a Nietzschean, but he's a complete reversal of what Nietzsche suggested. Because when Nietzsche talks about the death of God in his books, he's addressing people who are meant to already be atheists, right? He's not.
Right.
It's not an argument that God doesn't exist. It's not addressing Christians. It's addressing kind of intellectual scene in Europe that at that point had already lost God as kind of a metaphysical ordering principle, like a solid ground on which everything could lay. And he's suggesting that, this can lead us into an absolute insane, disastrous nihilism, or we can try and do something creative with it. But what we definitely shouldn't do is kind of pretend that God exists, and that doesn't necessarily mean in a direct way that Peterson does it. It can mean like a more vague term, kind of like trying to find in other functions the function that God's played, while Nietzsche is just saying that there's no solid foundation under us at all. But I think it's really fascinating that Peterson not only tries to find like the Christian God in himself, but as you know, in the kind of the trigger to this article, he tries to find God everywhere. So God is dead, but Peterson is trying to see him everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so. Look, I think it's not a very high bar that people who want to write about Nietzsche should sort of be aware that Nietzsche doesn't like Christianity. That seems like a reasonable expectation. That everybody has that as a starting point, but that is weirdly the part that Peterson seems to be missing, right? And I agree. I mean, Nietzsche isn't saying like, I mean, the last thing that Nietzsche is doing is like sitting around like, some fucking nerd like me might, like sort of, giving you arguments that there isn't a God, right? That's like, I mean, if anything, I mean, it's like the, right, Zarathustra comes down from the mountain and like, is like, oh, is it, what's the, is it possible that the old man at the mountain hadn't heard the news, right? That it's like, look, everybody fucking knows this.
He walks away laughing, like that's the funniest thing to him. That someone hadn't heard that God is dead.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like the idea is, that's funny. I remember, I think Doug Lane, years and years ago, he wrote this essay. It was going to be for Tor.com, I think. It was like some very Doug Lane thing. It was like Star Trek and the Death of God or something. And and I think the editors objected to it because it was something he'd said that was like offensive or hurtful to religious belief. And I remember Doug making the point at the time, it's like, well, this really proves the point, doesn't it? Right? That's like, because if God wasn't dead, right? In other words, if this sort of like unifying cultural belief in God, wasn't over, the objection wouldn't be that it was offensive, right? It would be that it was like heretical, right? That you, but yeah. So I mean, like the point of all that, like, yeah, like laughing at the old man who doesn't hasn't heard the news yet that God is dead, is that you should get real about the fact that this, like, it's sort of no longer possible to take this stuff seriously. And then you ask the really interesting question, which is, what comes next? And, do we, forge new and better values or whatever, like Nietzsche wants us to, but like, regardless, what comes next? And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm saying what you're saying, but I mean, just to like underline and circle the point, that like, Peterson,
you said it without saying the word metaphysical, so.
yeah. Like, it's like what, yeah, I mean, it's Peterson. It's funny, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, so there's a line in the book that Peterson wrote before 12 Rules for Life, right? 12 Rules for Life is a like psychotically successful book. It came out 5 years ago, and it's still, in the like few hundred most purchased of the tens of millions of books on Amazon. But before that, he wrote another book that nobody reads called Maps of Meaning.
And that one has like actual like academic citations and stuff.
Yeah. It's weird because it is that, but it's also a much crazier book than 12 Rules for Life. Like 12 Rules for Life is 12 Rules for Life is like mostly just totally unobjectionable and uninterested self-help advice. Like,
yeah, like I looked at it a bit for my PhD to see if he talked about privilege much in there, which he doesn't. But yeah, it seemed very boring.
Yeah, I mean, most of 12 Rules for Life is like, you should clean your room.
I should clean my room. It's a mess.
Yeah, well, you should clean your room. And if you're not walking up with your back straight, and the other rules, like I think
I've got great posture though.
Okay, all right, good. So you have a good starting point. But almost all the rules are totally fine. I have no objection to like. There's like one of them that's like, don't let your children do anything that would make you hate them. That I think is like a little silly. It's like, good luck with that.
The one that has a skateboard in the title.
Yes, don't bother yeah, it's like you shouldn't bother teenagers while they're skateboarding or something like that.
Right.
And but it's like, yeah, they only,
just shows how much of a fucking liberal he is.
yeah, that's true.
Like, why? I don't like what. Peterson is an atheist liberal academic who, for whatever reason, is like the head reactionary and hangs around with all these actual kind of like when Peterson is saying, when he's talking to Andy Nago or however you say it,
I think just no, but whatever, yeah.
and he's like crying, and there's a real, you can tell like he's an emotional man, but there's a lot going on, and he's saying, atheists are committing a crime with their hatred against the being of God or whatever. What's going through his head?
That is a good question. Yeah, I mean, he's somebody he really, again, he really likes the idea of religion. He's very he hates leftists and atheists and various groups like this. But yeah, his own belief system is not always as far apart from it as he would like to think, or for that matter, from postmodernism, which is another thing that he likes to hate. But yeah, like 12 Rules for Life, other than like the one about child rearing, which is like a little silly, and the one, and then there's like one that's just like his like bad politics just filtered into his self-help advice that's like, it's like a don't complain about the world until everything's great about you kind of rule. But other than that, the other 10 are totally fine. I mean, you should probably do almost all of those things. But he's got like 12 Rules for Life. He's got like a few pages of ranting about postmodern neo-Marxism because he can't help himself. But like,
I was also going to say that the guy that's giving naturalistic explanations for God, and is some kind of vague pragmatist, who, sir, really is the postmodern neo-Marxist?
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, he's certainly.
I believe in the truth.
I mean, he's a weird relativist about truth. He has he likes to play weird games about not knowing what words mean. Again, I think in some ways some of what he thinks is actually kind of a parody of postmodernism, but like 12 Rules for Life is mostly pretty normal. There's like a sprinkling of Petersonian insanity throughout the book, but it's like mostly normal and fine. Maps of Meaning, the earlier book, is really weird. I mean, it's like in some ways it's his like academic kind of book about Jungian psychology and all that, but there's also like the reason I was thinking about it earlier is that he says this thing, like there's a point where he says something in the book. I know friend Matt McManus always likes to quote this line. He says it's more than metaphysically true. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? More than metaphysically true.
It's just another word for reedy.
He also, by the way, one of the reasons I know nobody reads Maps of Meaning is that there's like really weird, embarrassing shit that he says in there about like his own dreams that like people would constantly be quoted to make fun of if anybody read that book. Like there's a thing about his grandmother that I'm not going to quote on a family-friendly podcast. There's a great there's a thing like he's got this whole thing about how he used to be like he says he used to be a socialist. He was a member of some socialist group in Canada, which he's kind of dramatic about everything, so he almost makes it sound like he was a member of a revolutionary communist party or something. But like I'm 90% sure it's just the NDP. But whatever. He then he gave up on that. He came to see the error of his ways because he read George Orwell and misinterpreted him basically, and then but he was still concerned enough about certain kinds of political issues that he was very concerned about the danger of nuclear war, and he said he had like a year of having these intense, vivid dreams about thermonuclear apocalypse, and And he says that was what originally led to his interest in psychology. That first he read Freud's book, Dream Psychology. And then he read, but then Freud wanted to make everything all about sex. And he said his dreams had nothing to do with sex. So he needed to look elsewhere, and which is what led him to Jung. Hold that thought. The one example he gives us is one of these dreams is starts out by him talking about how he's in his dream, he's watching TV with his cousin, who he parenthetically describes as the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. It's his cousin. And then something goes wrong with the TV, and he goes down to the basement to like check it out. And then the bomb goes off. Everything's destroyed. And he walks outside, and the post-nuclear apocalypse landscape is all chaos, including, for some reason, there are dogs walking around in their hind legs, and the dogs are offering people are bartering. The dogs are like trading cooked meat for canned food, and so he takes the trade. He accepts some of the cooked meat from one of the dogs, and then he realizes that the cooked meat is the cooked flesh of his hot cousin. It's like, yeah, man, you're right. Freud couldn't help you with this. There's absolutely nothing sexual going on here about this dream. Like, obviously.
I mean, that seems like one of those, like Reddit shitty horror stories, But then the meat was your dad.
Yeah. But yeah, but I mean, going back to the original point, I think what Peterson is doing is, I think you're exactly right. I think it is precisely the thing that his guy Nietzsche wants people not to do, which is to say, like, oh, it would be really bad if God was dead, so let's just pretend that he's still alive, that, like, you're not like grappling with it, properly. And I find, this really interesting, especially in light of the fact that he does have this weird view about truth that would, on the face of it, look like a get out of jail free pass to let him say what he so desperately wants to say, which is, yes, God exists, I believe it, full stop. Right? That because, okay, so he clearly believes that, Christian religious belief is like really good for the world. It's like a really positive social force. It's like really dangerous to lose it. And his official position, like, I mean, the first time I ever heard Peterson for an extended period of time, I think, was like, I know I first encountered him because I saw Doug Lane again posting a clip of Peterson, like, in a lecture hall ranting about Marxists, and which was probably 2017, maybe early 20.
You became famous when I was in Syria, so I missed out.
Yeah. Yeah, probably if you were, probably there was a lag of 6 months or so before everybody in Syria was reading 12 Rules for Life. But but yeah, like, he was, so I know I didn't listen to this when it first came out, but I know by 2018, at least, I had listened to this Peterson's first appearance on Sam Harris's podcast, which is now called Making Sense. It used to be called Waking Up. And this was before 12 Rules came out. So basically the thing that, like, really 12 Rules was the book that really took Peterson into the stratosphere, but he had already started to gain some fame before then because of his crusade against Bill C-16 in Canada, which in Peterson's imagination was a law to force him to say people's preferred pronouns.
And that, like, he would be arrested and charged with a crime if he didn't. Not that he would get, like, in trouble in some other way.
Yeah, that is, he did say a lot of things that suggested that. Yeah, which is kind of amazing on a lot of levels. But anyway, that's what he thought, that it was the, like, I mean, C16, as far as I've ever been able to tell, and look, I'm not a lawyer, never mind a Canadian lawyer, but the Canadian Bar Association seems to agree with me about this. If you go back and look at their the statement they released about it at the time that this was being debated. So as far as I could tell, C16 was just like an anodyne proposal to expand Canada's pre-existing framework of anti-discrimination law to include gender identity. And like the reason, like the kind of thing that the law was really targeting was like housing and employment discrimination and stuff like that. But
I mean, it passed many years ago, right? And he's still...
Yeah. Nobody, as far as I know, I mean, look, if I'm wrong about this, I've got a contact on my website. You can write it correctly.
One Jordan Peterson, but first off, there's the Jordan Peterson who died in Russia from the benzodiazepine treatment. But there's also a third Jordan Peterson who's in prison in Canada for doing anti-trans crimes.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, if anybody could point me to evidence that contradicts this, send me a message and I will eat crow on this. But I don't believe that anybody has gone to jail for using the wrong pronouns in these several years that this law has been on the books in Canada. I really don't think it was about that. But and even if it was, anyway, whatever. I also never understood if that was really his concern, why he wasn't advocating like, hey, let's have an amendment to like spell out, right? This cannot be used to punish people for the pronouns. But regardless, so this was the context of his appearance on Sam Harris's podcast. Harris, I think, was too credulous about it, right? I mean, that'd be my critique of Harris on that podcast, that he doesn't really push back. It's like, really, are you sure that this is going to be used that way? That, they're building the pronoun gulags, like that doesn't sound plausible, right? But in any case, they barely talk about it because they get sidetracked very early in the discussion, and they end up spending most of it arguing about truth. And Peterson advocates this weird view that's like this kind of, I mean, I call it the essay, this kind of bargain basement pragmatism about truth, in that like it's like a really, dumb version of what pragmatist philosophers might have thought about truth. That like those guys might have thought that there's some, like, okay, so the correspondence theory of truth says that, you have statements that describe facts, and if they're describing them correctly, the statements are true. And if they're misrepresenting the facts, the statements are false, which, is one of those things that you run into in philosophy where when you say it out loud, it seems weird that you'd even have to spell that out. But that's the, and, there is a complicated debate about this, and there are real criticisms of that or whatever. But like, pragmatists of any kind reject that and say, no, that's not what makes statements true. That instead instead of like looking for correspondence to some kind of external reality, we should, in order to think about what truth is, we should be sort of staying within the sphere of like, human concerns in some way. Like, so like, C.S. Peirce says, I believe, I'm absolutely nothing like a Peirce scholar, but I think that his view is like, well, statements are true if they would be included within like final science, or they're consistent with like the sort of like whatever, like at the sort of endpoint of scientific inquiry, we would arrive at, that's what makes statements true. And they're, it's like probably a very interesting discussion to be had about why people like Peirce or William James don't like the correspondence theory and what these other views have going for them. And people criticize those other views on the grounds that it's like, okay, but wait a second, couldn't there be things that like we're never going to discover, but just are objectively true or not true? And, whatever, like there's a whole debate we can have about this. And to be honest, I'm not very sympathetic to even the sort of smart and sophisticated kind of pragmatism. But regardless, Jordan Peterson's kind is just kind of dumb, right? I mean, it's like a it's like somebody.
It seems dumb, but also he's not very good at defending it. Because with some example that Sam Harris gave about like a toxic dump, that's what you said in the essay, right?
Yeah. So in the essay, Peterson's view is that truth is about what promotes the survival and flourishing maybe of the human race, and Harris lobs some pretty basic objections at this, right? Like this is not like this, like the kind of thing that you'd think anybody who advocated this would have spent some time thinking about and would have like a line on, right? You know, they'd be able to say, oh, here's how I would explain this case or whatever. Like Harris says stuff like, well, hold on, what if there's like a chemical weapons lab that there's like a leak from the lab? This is 2017. So we're not, you know, lab leak doesn't have the same resonance it does now, but you know, there's a leak from the lab, and this accident at the chemical weapons lab, it ends up leaking out into the water supply. It wipes out the entire human race. Okay, but does that mean that the theory of chemistry that they were working with wasn't true because it led to the extinction of the human race? Like that seems obviously wrong. And
Right.
and Peterson doesn't quite seem to be sure what to say to that. He just kind of does his Petersonian word salad in response.
Well, it just seems like he could have been like, you know, well, in one sense, no, kind of, in the sense that at least normatively, if not descriptively, they shouldn't have been doing that. But also in the sense of kind of like, you know, no, we should have kept up that chemical theory because only through believing it would we have been able to contradict it and kind of solve the issue. But as far as I'm aware, he didn't say anything like that, did he?
No. I mean, yeah, people could go back. I've got a link to that discussion if you want to be really frustrated for 2 hours, but also like sort of entranced by what's going on. People could go back and listen to that. But no, as I recall, he didn't say anything remotely like that. He didn't seem to. His response didn't show me much sign that he quite got what the objection was, or
Which, you know, like, it's not, it shouldn't be the end of the world that a Canadian psychiatrist doesn't have a very good theory of truth or kind of politics or whatever. But Jordan Peterson puts himself in a very bad situation because he comments on all these things and tries to give some kind of, basically, like, he tries to be like a systemic philosopher, which is something which doesn't really exist anymore. Someone that can give an account of basically ethics and meta-ethics and metaphysics and truth and knowledge and so on. And obviously he fails because, you know, for various reasons, but he fails at this. But
for all sorts of reasons, he fails at it. But yeah, I mean, he is somebody who is interested in weighing in on all of these subjects, like very extensively, and with, you know, and with one of the world's biggest megaphones for talking about this stuff, right? I mean, so, but it is, but yeah, and so I guess just to connect the dots a little bit as we sort of head towards the final stretch here, like, I mean, I guess I sort of said this earlier, but I mean, just to sort of put a little bow on this part, the reason why this is interesting to me, because you're right. I mean, look, okay, you know, weird Canadian psychiatry professor hasn't figured out, you know, all of philosophy. Is like, sure, right? You know, but it's also like, you know, if you are interested in like thinking about Peterson's religious pronouncements, which is, you know, what the essay, the project of the essay, then it is, I think, really telling, because given all of his stated beliefs, right, like all of his stated beliefs about the social utility of religion and Christianity in particular, the Bible and all that stuff on the one hand, and given his view of truth on the other hand, if you put those two together, he should be entitled to say with a clear conscience, yep, I believe in God. There's definitely a God. That's definitely true. And that would be, correct by his lights to say that. And so the fact that he doesn't say that, the fact that he spins all this like weird, evasive word salad. I know you don't. Yeah, no, you spin salads. All right, I stand by my metaphor. That he's doing all this whenever the subject comes up. I think is telling about exactly how far he is from being an actual religious believer. That he's because he has. I think that there is a sort of basic correspondence intuition that he can't quite get past, even though it conflicts with his official position on truth, and that there is some part of him that does recognize that's like he doesn't believe in God in the way that he believes that it's in the way that he believes in the correctness of Jungian psychology, or the way that he believes in just pick some empirical fact that he thinks is true, right? Like that, like he, he's, I think, on some level actually too honest to be willing to pretend that he believes in it in that sense, that because he just doesn't, so, but he also doesn't want to say, no, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist, because he thinks that like that's bad. He like morally disapproves of atheism.
We haven't mentioned it so far, but I think what's especially surprising to me that he won't kind of give a straightforward answer on God is that I think one of the major reasons that Peterson is so weepy, and it's the same reason that kind of he's so willing to comment on so many issues and go on all these places and so on, is that I think he feels an immense responsibility to young men.
Mm-hmm.
And on that basis, it does seem especially strange for me that he won't be willing to commit to like just saying that God is real for the sake of these young men, and because he believes that would, be such a clear benefit. And obviously, he obfuscates, but it's a good way to turn people off, because he seems, if you're not really into it, it's kind of a Marmite, and you're kind of fascinated by him blabbering on about dragons. But for another half of people, you're like, this guy is an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, and like the category of people that, by the way, who I find most fascinating here are like true believers, like evangelicals who like Jordan Peterson, and I can only surmise either aren't paying close enough attention to see that he doesn't agree with them, or else they don't care that he doesn't agree with them, because what they're ultimately interested in is that, he seems sort of whatever he seemed, he's got his strange sort of charisma or whatever, and he's yelling at their culture war enemies. And ultimately what people care about, the discourse is like that, that you're like, anybody who can spite my culture war enemies is my friend. I mean, it's like, ultimately it's like, in some ways it kind of rhymes with, the conservative evangelical love of Donald Trump, who in 2016 famously, he said that the Bible was his favorite book, and he was asked what his favorite verse was, and he literally didn't know a single verse of the Bible. And obviously Trump has neither knows or cares about Christianity in any way, and has not conducted himself the way that those people would like in his personal life or anything like that, right? But it sort of doesn't matter.
I mean, I think Donald Trump is basically like a solipsist.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, certainly the, moral, sort of acts like it moral as if there weren't any other people. And he, but sort of don't care, right? I mean, I always like the sort of semi-joking thing I always said about this is like, look, Donald Trump could give a speech in front of an inverted cross with blood dripping off of it, and as long as he owned the libs in the speech, the evangelical base would
just be like, oh yeah, it's St. Peter's Cross.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wanted to say, was it yesterday or the day before you had Ashley on?
I had Ashley on yesterday.
Okay.
Yep. Yesterday
And
morning.
Ashley is for a while, and I think we're going to get to it eventually, has wanted to do a thing on sublation in the magazine and on the YouTube show of kind of what can the left offer to young men, and being kind of explicit that we're talking about young men and not kind of
Yeah.
genericizing things to young people. And also in my people who don't know, Ashley's also my PhD supervisor. Um, when I'm writing my PhD, Ashley's always like, okay, this is a good kind of discursive critique of these ideas in privilege theory. But ultimately, what you should be explaining, what's the most interesting thing to explain, is why, despite these flaws, privilege theory is so possible, is so
Right.
popular. So, on
Yeah.
the basis of those two things, kind of why do you think, despite the flaws of Jordan Peterson that we've talked about for an hour, I'm not on kind of, and not on, the critique that we've given today has nothing to do necessarily with leftism, right? You could be
Yeah.
right wing in a right wing atheist and give exactly the same critique we've given today. So on that basis, why do
Or
you
to
think Jordan?
really sharpen it, you could be a right wing theist and get the
Yeah,
same critique.
To be
Be
honest,
like,
yeah,
look, this guy is pretending to be one of us, but he's not.
yeah. Why do you think Jordan Peterson is so popular? And what do you think the left can offer young men in the same sort of way? Like, do you think there can be a left wing Jordan Peterson who
Yeah.
or is the best kind of the we can have like a Hassan Piker
Yeah.
who's just a handsome, charismatic young man that other young men can admire, but doesn't kind of
Yeah.
hide
I
their
mean,
line.
I am very firmly on the side of thinking that it is good that Hassan Piker exists, because like whether or not I agree with everything he says, whether or not the way that he says things is like exactly what like some like weird Marxist nerd like me thinks is correct or not, right? Like I think that if you think about the kind of guy, like young guy who's like watching Hassan, that is probably the the politically best voice who could possibly be in that kid's ear, right?
Yeah,
That like it's so much better that they're watching this than like anything else they could realistically be watching that would sort of be filling a lot of the same niche. So yeah, I mean, I think that so you asked a few different things. Could try to take it piece by piece. I mean, I think that um, on the self help thing, I do actually think that look, there is some value probably to. I mean, I'm not, I'm going to just front load the fact that I'm not volunteering to fill this niche. This would not be this would not be the best lane for me for all sorts of reasons. But like, but I think there probably is some value in having like it's clearly something that people want, and I think that there would be some value to having somebody with better politics doing some of the self-help stuff, and specifically doing self-help stuff that's oriented towards young men. Um, and I am like I'm I'm not gonna I'm a middle-aged guy who was married for 10 years and has said is I'm not gonna go around giving anybody dating advice, but there is
look, we've
there's
got such a large pool, which definitely isn't CGI'd in.
yeah, no, I'm at Pascal's place. Yeah, I like, but look, I mean, this is probably a bad idea to surrender this space to reactionary weirdos. And I know people will say,
And there is a lot of kind of left or like kind of very strong lib left kind of self help book, but they're mostly like, this is why you're racist, and here's how not become not racist. And
as
this forms a large sample of my PhD. But these are obviously only going to succeed for people who are already guilty,
totally,
and
yeah,
those are the bad
it's
people.
only gonna appeal to people who are like already the right kind of weird masochist to like that, right? I mean, this is something. There's a clip that I've played a couple times on my show. If people want to find this online, it's on YouTube. There's a Michael Brooks, a several months before he died, so just before the pandemic, he gave this talk at Lafayette College's The Mill series, where there's just this wonderful moment where he's talking in there about the appeal of these guys, and he's like, yeah, people pick up some magazine or whatever they associate with the left, and just probably some lib nonsense, whatever, but it's all like, yeah, Seinfeld is problematic, and like everything is bad, and
Here's why jokes are bad.
Yeah, exactly. And then he actually does.
If you're 27 and you're dating a 24-year-old, you deserve to be in prison.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of people who spend all their time dusting consensual relations like a CSI team for microscopic traces of power imbalances. And then he does the impression of Jordan Peterson, which he could actually do, but again, I'm not going to try to do. Being like, you're great, right? And it's like, yeah, this is gonna be much more appealing. And so, yeah, I think it is a bad idea probably to surrender that space. I think that there's this kind of idea that people have that, well, self-help and leftism don't fit because roughly the left says that your problems are structural and and not about personal responsibility or whatever. I think I would push back against that. I think that is a pretty brutal oversimplification. There is, of course, a sense in which to be on the left is to say that certain kinds of problems are more about social structures than individual decisions, but also...
Well, it's kind of like, well, yeah, my problems have been caused by social structures, probably, but also I can probably do something about them myself, and I can't fix the social structure, so I may as well try and fix the other things.
Yeah, and also... yeah, I mean, right. So I think both of these are true. That even problems that are caused by social structures, that doesn't make you helpless about doing anything about the way that they play out in your life. I think
unless we don't have free will, as Sam Harris argues.
Yeah, exactly. Well, next week. But that's absolutely right. But also, not all personal. You don't have to. You could be a leftist, a socialist, a Marxist, all of these things, and have this very correct analysis of why quite a lot of what's wrong with the world is due to capitalist social structures, but also not be such a not have turned your brain off to nuance to such an extent that you can't see that
it's just vulgar materialism, right?
Not all personal problems are in fact due to if just addressing myself to random person in the audience, right? This isn't anybody in particular, but it's capitalism isn't really why you don't have a girlfriend, right? You can, you can maybe you should just fucking go outside more, right? That's there's a, and it's complicated because capitalism could exacerbate some of the reasons why you don't or whatever, but we could live in an unfathomably advanced socialist society and fully automated luxury communism, and there would still be people who needed to get their lives together. Because humans are complicated and not everything is caused by economics or whatever. So I am softer on self-help than some people on the left. But I would also say, okay, so the two components of your question, I don't really think I've answered, are why is Peterson so popular? Well, I sort of answered that, but why is Peterson so popular? And can the left say something better for the kind of young men who...
in spite of being a vague, the top vague poster in the world.
Yeah. So I wrote a book. I didn't write the book. I wrote a small part of a book called Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of... Sorry, PMC. Leftist critique of Jordan Peterson for Zero Books a couple of years ago. So the main... so it was a collection of essays. The main essays were written by Matt McManus and Conrad Hamilton, and Marion Trejo McManus also wrote one, and Slavoj Žižek wrote the introduction. But my essay in Myth and Mayhem was sort of an examination of Peterson's use of rhetoric. And I actually think there is a lot, so anybody who's curious about what I say could go find that book. But I actually think there is a lot to be learned from Peterson's rhetorical techniques. I think he is actually very for everything we've been talking about, look, there is a reason why. There are a lot of reasons, actually, right? Why he's so popular despite everything. And I think he is actually.
And it's not because young men are really evil.
No, I don't think so. He has he is actually, in certain respects, a very effective and compelling communicator. Even though, by the way, we were talking about 12 Rules for Life earlier. The one of them that he just, to a hilarious extent, never follows is be clear and precise in your speech. That is one of the 12 rules.
I think that is the thing that's interesting about Peterson, and the way that he is decisively Nietzschean. Is that Peterson doesn't give advice on things that he's perfectly mastered, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the appeal. When people that critique Peterson will be like, look at his messy room in the background of this video. But that's exactly the point. He knows that he should be cleaning his room. Well, someone that naturally and immediately always cleans their room and never has a messy room, why would you take advice from them? Because they don't know what it is to have a messy room and then to have a clean room, right? And he's engaged in this process of like Nietzsche was a very sickly man. Peterson is a very sickly man who's gone through this, and Nietzsche was a drug addict and Peterson is a drug addict and so on. And I think that's the kind of the way that he is very Nietzschean and the way that he is very interesting to young people and to why his advice seems a lot more real than it might be from other people. Exactly because he's a male son.
I like it. But so, I do think that there's a lot you can learn from Peterson's rhetoric. I also think that he is addressing certain real problems, even if his solutions are not really solutions at all. But when he talks about, we're having this whole conversation framed in terms of young men. It's not like young women are fine, right? There's but it does play out differently, right? So we could stick to this for our purposes right now. I think that when he's talking about these young men feel sort of confused, adrift, and alienated, and feeling like they can't have the sort of pathway through life that they think that they should have, and all that, that's not based on nothing, right? That's he's putting his finger on something real. And I do think it's a huge mistake for people with, let's just use the vague term, progressive politics to sort of be dismissive about that because, young, who cares about them because they're privileged or whatever. I think that's I think that's just analytically wrong. And I think it's a giant political mistake. And,
it's a losing game.
And I think that, and I think to answer the last part of your question that I haven't really addressed, I will just point people towards something that I wrote at the end of last year for the Daily Beast. I wrote an article called "Jordan Peterson's Politics Hurt the Young Men He says he wants to help," and I think that the better way to push back against this stuff is not by it's all right, this is a maybe too hot a take for the end of our discussion, just to say this and leave it hanging, but it's in a weird way, it's the way that so much of the online discourse about the most recent horrifying video of a police killing is about, were these black cops in fact motivated by anti-black racism? And look, I don't actually find the suggestion that you could be black and be motivated by anti-black racism absurd by any means, right? I think that I think anybody who's sort of saying that that's absurd probably hasn't thought about it that much, but also I think it's kind of the wrong approach to take to really hyper focus on that issue and die on the hill of no, they were definitely motivated by anti-black racial bias. I think that the much better way of approaching it is, look, police violence is a huge problem that often overlaps with this other problem of racial bias, but even when it doesn't, it's a big problem, right? And you should take it seriously. And it's bad even when it doesn't if we lived in a world where 100% of the cops who beat and killed defenseless people had the same skin tone as the people who were beating and killing, that doesn't mean it would be fine, right? Nothing to see here, like it would still be bad, right? And that's the thing that you should focus on. And I think I think sort of roughly analogously, right? I think that the thing to focus on about, Peterson, I mean, I think if you're sort of stuck on like, he's he says young men have it so bad, but actually, they don't have it so bad, or he's like, whatever, he's the king of the incels, or like whatever the sort of ways that people have insulted him. I think that's kind of exactly the wrong approach. That I think that the right approach is to say, say, look, okay, yeah, you're right. These young men who he says are confused and adrift and alienated, and they're not, forming stable long-term relationships and like having life pathways they feel good about and all that stuff. He's not making any of that up, right? That's real. That's a big problem. It's it's not the only segment of the population that's having problems like that, but it's one of them. And sure, let's talk about it, right? Like that's. But also, I think the right way to push back is it's like, look, who did that, right? Like, feminism didn't do that, right? Like, gay or trans people existed, didn't do that, right? That's not like late capitalism did that, right? Like this is like what is like if you actually like we have some fairly, and I'm not just sort of I'm not just kind of blindly spouting Marxist dogmas here. Like we actually have some fairly specific statistical evidence on this, right? If you look at the surveys where like couples who are unmarried, but at least one of the people in the couple would like to get married, or that don't have children, but at least one of them would like to have children. There's all this survey data on this, and nobody says like, "Oh, I'm not going to do it because I read Andrew Dworkin or whatever, right? That's why, right? It's I'm too much of a postmodern Marxist to want to get married or have kids. What they always say is like the top reasons are all like, I'm not in a financial position. My partner isn't in a good financial position. I'm not going to get any time off work. My partner doesn't have any time off work. We both need to work. There's too much financial pressure. Like it's all. I mean, it's all stuff that is more or less what you would predict given straightforward vulgar Marxism.
There's a great essay called "The New I can't pronounce the word superfluous, the superfluous, superfluous, the new superfluous men." By Alex Gendler in American Affairs Journal, which talks about this and talks about how there's always been unneeded men. There's always been too many men who are kind of at an end without a purpose. And historically, there's always been places for them to go. There were monasteries, or there was the army, and so on. The problem is now, and then there was a brief time kind of in the 1950s and maybe the 1960s where basically this category was abolished, where we didn't have this class of men and kind of everyone was kind of included. And now we're kind of restored to that condition, this grand historical condition. But in this process, kind of when we managed to successfully abolish it for a while, all these places where these young men could go to were also got rid of, obviously.
Right.
Now the real difference of our problem is that there's nowhere for these young men to go to. And obviously kind of, I think the Petersonian solution either would be kind of a return to the 1950s through enforced monogamy or whatever, or it would be kind of some kind of new monastic system or whatever, right? Something like this. You could definitely see him arguing for that, right?
Yeah,
Basically,
no,
probably
absolutely.
as soon as if he watched this, he'd probably start advocating this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. No, I think that. Yeah, I could totally see that. That's we should have monasteries to stick the superfluous men in. I mean, like, but this is also. I mean,
obviously,
this
as
this
socialists
yeah,
and communists, what we want to do is just overcome this whole thing.
yeah. No, exactly. And like, I think that. I mean, this is kind of. I mean, this is kind of a political hobby horse of mine. I mean, this is something I've riddled out a lot in the last year. That like, this is something that drives me nuts when conservatives will say will express this desire to go back to the family formations of the 1950s. That they'll say like J.D. Vance and Blake Masters, who were the Peter Thiel candidates for Senate last year, both said things like this on the campaign trail, that we should be able to, that like they were in favor of single income households. And the thing about that is, look, there's a part of this that I'm fine with. Like, I think that if I don't think there should be any gender based pressure on anybody to do this, right? Like that, like, but I think it's a totally legitimate desire to, like, like if a couple wants one of them to stay home with the kids, that's fine, right? Like that's something a decent society would enable, right? That whether it's the man or the woman, or they're both going to work part time so they can spend more time with the kids or whatever, right? Like, it's I think that is absolutely a legitimate desire. But when these guys say things like this, they don't really mean it. They're just trying to score culture war points because, like, okay,
All right,
seriously.
like yeah, you hear them kind of proposing these things. You're like, within capitalism, that would require you to spend like hundreds of billions in like welfare.
Yeah. Like, what's the
Like,
plan to, it's like, what's the plan that any of these right wing weirdos would endorse to, to restore the like 1950s family wage so you could have like a single earner, like a single earner with like a normal job,
yeah,
like
the minimum wage would have to be like $50.
yeah, exactly, right? It's like these guys don't want to do any of that, right? I mean, they just want to, like, they just want to use this to sort of score trad points, but like that's not, like, if they actually, I mean, look, if they actually came up with an economic proposal to do this, then it's like, my God, right? That's a, I will sign up for, like, if we have an action plan, to get everybody the $50 minimum wage, I will sign up for that red brown coalition, but they don't, because they're not serious.
I was gonna. Do you know that? Do you know that Andrew Tate is black?
He's like, oh yeah, I think he's got like
Well,
one.
he basically his dad is African American, but it's interesting because he grew up in Britain, he's not black. But if he grew up in the United States, he would be.
I see. Yeah, I don't know what's the I don't know what the racial mores are in Romania.
No, it's just very interesting to think about like how differently he'd be portrayed in American media if he was officially classed as African American.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it is funny that, like, he like, up until a minute ago, he was all about how Romania was this like much healthier society, and like this like nice traditional place, the way that a country should be. And then they arrested him for his various crimes, and now he's like, this is a communist dictatorship that doesn't care about individual rights.
Um, to move us on to next week, do you know who's a big hater of compatibilism?
Sam Harris.
Well, Doug
Who else?
Lane.
Doug Land. Nice. Okay, that's fun. Okay, so I will. Yeah, maybe we can get Doug to.
And to be clear, that Doug at least wants to be a free will believer, but he
Yeah,
doesn't think that he thinks compatibilism is just kind of word games or whatever. And so
yeah, yeah,
he tries to have kind of like a leap of faith towards some kind of libertarianism, but he knows himself that it doesn't make any sense.
yeah. Okay. Doug, if you're watching this, don't be of good cheer. We'll
We'll solve all your problems next week. You'll be so convinced
exactly.
as we give a
Well,
long form treatment to compatibilism.
looking forward to it.
Okay, bye everyone.